Welcome all. Thank you for joining. I'm Peter Howard. I'm the Executive Director of the Digital Business Institute at Questrom School of Business at Boston University. And we have two great panelists today who I'll introduce in a moment. First, some housekeeping though. First of all, thank you again for joining, for taking time out of your day. This is a very timely and exciting topic that we have, and we're all very excited to share it with you and have an open discussion. First of all, this is being recorded, so keep that in mind, although nothing that it will be various, I'm sure. Answers, please put your questions in the chat box, and we will take them and route them to the appropriate panelist. Other than that, let's jump right in. If we could, you are at the Crucial Digital Transformations of the American Healthcare Systems in a Post-COVID Era session brought to you by Questrom Insights event. So thanks, Sandy. If we could go to the next slide. Not seeing them advance yet. Okay, that's just the welcome. Can go to the next one. All right, so today we're going to do a little introduction. As I said, we'll have opening remarks by Professor Seidman, opening remarks by Dr. Woodson, some Q&A, so please ask questions, we'll route them, and then we'd really like to have an interactive discussion at the end to really make it free-forming. Okay, next slide, please. First, a quick note about the Digital Business Institute. Our institute is really an incubator, accelerator, and orchestrator for research, executive education, and really we focus on student experiential learning opportunities for our students at Questrom Business School. But it's all about partnering with the business community, with our alumni, and our Questrom Business Boston University community. We've been in existence for really started up about a year ago, and we're really having some good momentum with the expert panelists that we have today and with other faculty members in our robust student body. Quick to the next slide. What makes us unique, again, just a little plug for our institute, is that we're really practical, relevant, human-centric, and results-focused. So we really try to focus on practical, relevant research that's applicable to real-world issues. We're human-centric. I mean, people are really what makes digital transformation possible. It's about leveraging technology rather than focusing on it. We're focused on results, and I think today's discussion will be very results-orientated, as you'll see. And we're really proud to be a local Boston institution. I mean, Boston is such a hub for digital technology, healthcare, and finance that we're really proud to be part of our Boston community. So enough said on our institute. That's kind of who we are, and you know, please email me back with any further interest in that, or if you'd like to get further involved. But without further ado, let's jump in. If you go to the next slide, please, I'd like to introduce Professor Sidman. He's a full-time information systems faculty member at Questrom School of Business, relatively new with us, Ivy, right, since July. Great to have him with us. He's a national expert in areas of digital health and telemedicine. Has been leading clinical and economic research in these areas for 20 years. Professor has consulted with America's foremost pharmaceutical companies, hospital systems, and earlier this year he got invited to join New York State's Corona Task Force addressing the safe opening policies of the state. So he's very deep in this topic. And I will pass to him in one moment, but then if you could switch to the next slide, Sandy. I also want to introduce Dr. Woodson, and then we will go from remarks from Professor Seidman to Dr. Woodson seamlessly. So Dr. Woodson is MD. He's the director of our Institute for Health Systems Innovation and Policy. Dr. Woodson's the Lars Anderson Professor in Management, Professor of the Practice at Questrom School of Business. He's got joint appointments as Professor of Surgery at the School of Medicine, Professor of Health Law, Policy Management at the School of Public Health. And he was also, had a very interesting background in the Department of Defense, which he will tell you about when he starts as the, I believe it was the Assistant Director or Assistant Director of Healthcare Policies for the Department of Defense. Dr. Woodson?
The Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs.
Yes, there's apologies for getting that wrong. But yes, great background. So with that said, let's kick it to Professor Seidman, and we'll jump right in. There we go.
Good morning, everybody. It's a delight for me to have you all in here. Thank you for taking the time. We are going to discuss a very important topic for the healthcare system. We call it the digital transformation. This is a fairly difficult, evolving topic, but it has tremendous promises as far as improving the care for all our citizens. What we would like to do during this brief presentation is present and highlight some of the issues as we see them right now. And then I would like to hear from you any questions, any comment you might have regarding this topic, any suggestions, and so forth. If you look at the future after COVID-19, we've been going through a transition. We had a normal life roughly until early 2020, January, February, March. Things start coming to us from China, from Europe, whatever. And we got into a crisis mode in the healthcare system that took 3 to 6 months, kind of adjusting to something that we've never seen for over 100 years. We're now in a period that I will call it the period of new normal that may take us 3 to 5 years until we come to what I call the period of outlook. But things are not going to go back the way they were for many reasons, and I think it's fairly obvious. For one, digital takes over. Now we have developed and accelerated processes for remote care of patients, for monitoring, and hospitals are monitoring other hospital ICU for quite a while, but now it's also at home. We also changed the rules of compliance and administration, insurance, and innovation. For example, with telemedicine, we allow now among certain states, not uniformly, cross-state treatment. You can be in California, treat patients in New York State, something we could not have thought about it in a year ago. Now we have to think about the new digital strategy for healthcare. The fact that a hospital does an electronic medical record or electronic payroll processing does not make them digital strategy ready. What do we do next? How much money do we have? How do we calculate the return on investment? And what new entities will rise up now? Because there's a huge number of startups coming around saying, we want to provide you with innovation such as digital treatment. How do we take care of it? The crisis of COVID-19 also exposed the weakness of our pharma and medical supply chain. We exported a lot of our manufacturing and R&D capabilities, from antibiotics to biologics, all the way to PPE, protective personal equipment. It may be cheaper to do things abroad, but we may think about, okay, can we bring some of it back as a strategic asset so we don't get exposed again in the way it's been happening right now. We also realize that research and development, vaccine is just one example, become a national asset. So how are we going to invest in it, and who is going to own the intellectual property? The government, individual firms, university, etc. There's a growing activity around blockchain for managing controlled substances, tracking drugs, because I need to track the vendor of the vendor of the vendor that produces chemical coming into the mix that I put into the mouth of my patient. Electronic medical record suffer from a big disease. We call it lack of interoperability. We are running a system like a bank that every branch is using different electronic medical record, or every branch of the bank uses different accounting system. So integration is far from ready. None of us understands our medical bill, and it's getting worse all the time. Finally, there's a question of how do we encourage R&D, and Boston is a big hub for us, all around Boston University. Some developers like to develop an idea, sell it to a big pharma, exit and sell. Others, like Moderna, like to scale it up and manufacture, go all the way. Exit is more tempting, but you run the risk of things leaving the country, or the expertise base is kind of gone, and it cuts the R&D the minute the scientists sell the stuff, and it just goes for manufacturing and marketing by many of the conventional pharma companies. If you look at the healthcare supply chain, you have the providers, which are the leading physicians in the process, and then those providers work primarily in a hospital, in a hostile care environment. They also recruits them inpatient to outpatient. And the patients come for care to the hospital, and the payers are being the ones who get the bills, and they pay back the provider and the hospital. The question we ask ourselves is, which digital technology will have the biggest impact? But it's important to understand that provider and hospital have three roles which are complementing and conflicting at the same time. Hospital provide clinical care, but they also provide GME education. They educate the next generation of physicians, nurses, physician assistants, etc. It's a training ground. Same thing with providers. Finally, there's the idea of research and development. Are we giving tomorrow the care we gave yesterday? The answer is no. So what is the role of the hospital, whether university affiliated or not, in terms of pushing R&D on the digital frontier, as well as what we call the wet labs, the conventional biological research track? And hospitals have a major deficiency in general, providing R&D for what we call the digital therapies. And we expect to see some changes in the very near future. If you look at the whole area, and I won't read the whole slide, there's a lot going on, from administrative automation, digitization, to disease management therapeutics, to drug discovery, clinical trial, pharma supply chain. These are all on this long list, startups, which are 1 to 2 to 3 years old, selected in this list, leading different frontiers. You don't see any major hospital there or any affiliation there, and that's a pity. So the question is, are we going to buy the products? How are we going to integrate it? Or how many R&D spin-off we expect from our current healthcare delivery system? Just to show the order magnitude. Between March and July, Mass General Hospital System, together with Brigham and Women, we call it the partners, they've conducted 1 million telehealth visits. It took MedLife and Teladoc, which are fairly famous, publicly traded company, about 9 to 10 years to achieve 1 million. And this happened in a few months. And once the horses leave the stable, they won't come back. So telemedicine is here to stay. We'll talk a lot more about it later on. But I would like Dr. John Woodson to kind of give the big perspective of what's going on in the healthcare scene, please.
Thank you, Avi. And while we're transitioning, again, if there
Great. Can you see my screen and hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Well, great. Well, thank you, Peter, for that introduction. And thank you, Avi, for your overview. And thank you to the participants for being part of this webinar. You know, the COVID pandemic has forced just about every industry to rethink how it's going to do business in the digital age and do business post-COVID. Many of the restructuring of industries and the way they'll operate will be based upon new digital platforms, as it gives the industry or the company great agility. What we believe is that in healthcare, CEOs need to think about what their comprehensive digital strategy will be for the future in order to ensure that they identify the right strategic partners and identify the right strategic investments going forward. And I think the COVID crisis has caused them to focus on many of these issues, but not with a comprehensive strategy in mind. So I want to, as I begin, to level the playing field by understanding what has driven the need for change in healthcare, and then why, in fact, developing comprehensive digital strategy is important to the competitive advantage. In 2001, the Institute of Medicine now, or I should say the National Academy of Medicine now, the Institute of Medicine published a document called Crossing the Chasm, a new healthcare system for the 21st century. It's of interest to note that in 2001, a lot of our technological platforms, digital platforms, were not available, but they identified several aspects of optimally functioning health system, which was, number one, it had to be safe, no excess harm or deaths. It had to be effective, meaning that evidence-based therapies would be used as soon as possible and as soon as new evidence was available. It needed to be efficient, meaning that it wouldn't waste resources, that's both human resources, time, as well as financial resources. It needed to be patient-centered, meaning respectful of how the customers or the patients wanted to receive care, their values. Equitable, meaning that all of those who needed care could receive care in a timely fashion. High performing and learning, which meant that it would incorporate new knowledge whenever that new knowledge was created and available, and connected. Now in 2001, connected really meant connecting providers with patients and all those concerned with the care. And in 2020, that really means a digital connection, as was demonstrated as a need during the COVID crisis. Every hospital system in the world, and certainly in this country, is dealing with the so-called iron triangle of challenges. One, to improve quality, two, to improve access to care, and three, to create a sustainable system, which means that you've got to use resources, both human resources and financial resources, in the most efficient manner. We're in the digital age, and so data is everywhere, but the challenge has been, how do we create usable knowledge and wisdom in systems and create true efficiency when we're talking about data existing in silos and different data repositories. So we need to create interoperability. We need to leverage the money we're pumping into our systems to leverage these investments. Billions of dollars have gone into electronic health records, but it has not yielded the efficiency or the effectiveness as outlined in the IOM report. We need to use new technologies such as advanced machine learning and data science to drive improvement. And then we need to match the data information and availability to the workflow so that providers and systems can work more effectively and efficiently, and match data analysis informatics to the operational needs. So data in health systems traditionally has been used to provide incremental change, somewhat progressive change or adaptive change. So when a lot of the quality systems came along, we were collecting data to make changes around the margins. But really now we have an opportunity to create a whole new way of delivering care, re-engineer care, and create disruption in healthcare by digital platforms and digital systems. So the issue nowadays is that we need to appreciate that every organization needs to think about their future in the digital age, and that organizations need to break free of the traditional modes of doing business, that every industry is becoming digital, and that the incumbents must think about how they're going to compete, collaborate, gain the competitive edge, how they might partner with digital giants to improve service delivery. Here at Boston University, and working with Dr. Venkatarama, who's written a book called The Digital Matrix, we've adapted some of his thoughts to create the idea of the digital health matrix. And it's about orchestrating and participating in new ecosystems, particularly with digital companies. So the health sector will need to evolve into a set of interconnected ecosystems across different traditional industries. That means that our normal partners that we think about in health systems may not actually advance our aims as effectively as partnering with some of the digital companies to produce better service delivery. The second is that we need to co-create capabilities with our partners. So it's about identifying who those strategic partners are in the digital space. And then third, we need to use these digital platforms to so-called automate, amplify, and augment human capability going forward. So there's this broad concept of digital health, which is the convergence of digital and genomic technologies with healthcare, living, and society to enhance the efficiency of healthcare and delivery and make medicine more personalized and precise. And that's a mouthful, but really that captures the potential of what we might achieve if we have a coordinated digital strategy. It clearly means that there'll be multidisciplinary input, that we're going to have to engage our patients and customers. We'll have to amplify human capabilities of our workforce using these digital platforms in order to optimize care, administrative process, and then transform health. About 2 years ago, I wrote this article for HBR in which I used my prior experience as a flight surgeon to talk about the importance of flying with instruments. In medicine, we often don't fly with those digital instruments that we need to integrate the huge volume of information that's important to optimizing care. And so we need to develop and fly by these instruments in the future. One of the interesting features that's evolving in healthcare is the concept of the home as the first and last line of healthcare that will be connected by the Internet of Medical Things and digital platforms. And in fact, the systems that adopt comprehensive digital strategy in the future will have a competitive edge as it will allow for greater access to care for populations that they don't normally serve, allow for greater home monitoring of chronic disease, reduced readmission rates, potentially reduced costs. But this has produced serious challenges in how to adapt the workforce and how to adapt the system and the investments to create this new strategy. Halverson and his colleagues have published a paper and actually a conceptual model outlining the fact that digital is now the fourth space in healthcare. And it's going to connect hospital, clinics, and homes in a way that hasn't been done before. And I always bring up this example as a clinician that, you know, if I have a patient who might be have some heart problems and susceptible to what we call congestive heart failure, if we have a simple thing like a digital scale and I find that they've gained 2 pounds in 2 days, I know that they're probably getting into problems, and through automated systems, we should be able to adjust their medicine to reduce the amount of excess water and prevent that hospitalization. In addition, there's a lot of work that's being done and a lot of progress being made in terms of biosensors and biomarkers that can connect digitally with providers to provide situational awareness of patient status or early warning of disease progress or development of disease. So to sum up, really, there are a bunch of technologies that are going to work to transform healthcare and hopefully produce better population health. The issue, though, really is for leaders to understand how to develop a comprehensive digital strategy to achieve that aim. So we can look at things like virtual and augmented reality, which might be important in patient education as well as development of the workforce and training the workforce. Gaming, which might also be important for training. In the military, we've actually used virtual and augmented reality and gaming to increasingly higher levels of extent in training actually troops to do very hazardous things with greater skill and judgment, and these are very young individuals. But additionally, synthetic biology and nanotechnology is going to be important and be a game changer in how we look at managing patients. Genomics and proteomics. And the issue of synthetic biology and nanotechnology, as well as genomics and proteomics, actually talks to the vast amount of knowledge that needs to be integrated in order to deliver personalized care. We won't be able to do this unless, in fact, we have cognitive assist with computer-based algorithms that help us synthesize a lot of this information to bring it to a personalized level. Additionally, things like ambient computing, which are the ecosystem of things that intelligently respond in real time, that help businesses make decisions and creates connectivity across databases. Data democratization, the seamless exchange of information, robotics, telemedicine we can talk about because that's been the signature change or the immediate pivot a lot of health systems have made, but they've done it in a very rudimentary fashion without really developing the systems around it to support excellence in telemedicine. The evolution of data science is going to change the way we do research as we bring functional knowledge into the area of computing to drive how we use data to drive change in real time. The other item that has come on board, that which many people understand from other business venues, is this issue of the platform revolution, which has certainly been popularized by one of our experts here at BU, Marshall Van Alden. He talks about this issue of networked markets and how that's changed the landscape. And you know, the easy examples are to think about Google and Amazon and how they've changed the retail market. In fact, they have eliminated a large portion of the retail market, which has been accelerated through the COVID crisis. So there are many technologies that are available, but can only be optimized if we have a strategy in healthcare to leverage these technologies. So digital disruption in healthcare is here. As I mentioned, every industry is dealing with it, and healthcare will have to deal with it as well. And so the final word I have is that we're going to have to also develop the effective leadership to understand how health systems can actually make this pivot and develop these strategies. It's important for the leadership to understand how to make the organizations pivot and thrive in a increasingly consumer-driven world in healthcare, create the enthusiasm for change, understand that the digital platforms will accelerate the pace of change, make the right strategic investments, cultivate the right strategic partners, and develop solutions for developing the workforce as we go forward. These clearly will represent wicked problems that leaders will have to deal with, but it's unlikely that the pace of change will, in fact, slow down or alter or revert to traditional ways of delivering healthcare. So it's the challenge of our time, and that's why we think this idea of developing the comprehensive digital strategy for healthcare transformation is so important. So Peter, I'll go back to you and see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Woodson. That was really fantastic. Okay, well, we have a couple initial housekeeping questions. Can you provide the name of the IOM report again, please? I think that was to you, Dr. Woodson.
Yes, absolutely. The name of the report is Crossing the Quality Chasm, published in 2001 by the Institute of Medicine.
Thank you very much. Will the deck be shared with the attendees? Great information in the presentation. Thank you for making that comment. And yes, I think we will share a subset of these slides, and we can send that out. We agree with our panelists?
Yes, we can share the slides.
Other questions? Could you give us examples of how digital technologies are currently evaluated against the Holy Grail characteristics laid out against the NAM Quality Chasm report? Was that you, Professor Sidman, or?
I think that was me.
Okay.
So, you know, again, the Holy Grail talked about safe, effective, efficient, patient-centered, equitable, high-performing, and connected. And when you think about all of those characteristics, digital platforms have an opportunity to create better situational awareness if you know your data, if you're connected to your patients, and to, as I mentioned before, as we have an increasingly large volume of information to synthesize, to tailor specific therapies to any one patient, it cannot be done without the benefit of computer-based decision analysis. So the digital strategy connects to just about it connects to every aspect of improving the health system and achieving the Holy Grail as set out by the IOM.
Great, thank you. Well, we're getting quite a few questions. Thanks everybody for participating. I will kick over to this question. I think it could be, Avi, why don't we kick it to you? But the question is, my impression is that the pandemic has changed our collective mindset with respect to new digital technologies. Physicians and payers accelerating remote medicine, regulators considering new types of endpoints and trial designs, etc. What other cultural/industry mindset changes do you feel are necessary in the coming years to continue accelerating digital transformation? Thank you. Why don't we start with Avi, and this is such a robust question, maybe we kick it over to Jonathan as well.
It's a very important question, and there are 3 or 4 players in the mix. One of them is the third-party payers. Part of it is government, Medicare, Medicaid. Another part is the state level, which is involved in some of those payment systems. Because one thing we have seen as the pandemic started is there's a big tension between the federal government and the states. If you look at the American system, strangely enough, you can be licensed in Massachusetts and in New York, but you cannot treat a patient in Connecticut, okay? Because each state want to control the standards of care, even though medicine is pretty much the same. All it does, it limits mobility of physicians. So these artificial barriers to go down. Similarly, if you look at Medicare, Medicaid, there's a big power given to the states to control some of those deliverables, which is also an issue. So states on one hand traditionally wanted to have some control through taxation and legislation of what kind of quality care they provide to the citizens. On the other hand, when it comes to a crisis, they all call the federal government, help, help, help. And the federal government in response, as you saw in the last year or so, saying, look, healthcare is more a state issue than a federal issue. The truth is there's intersection. The government is the FDA, the government controls the CDC and the big budgets from the defense to civil control, etc. So all those barriers between state and federal government, all the fences have moved, and one is to rethink what will stay at the city level, the state level, and what will go back to the federal level, and how we work together rather than trying to make it a zero-sum game. State with the state rather than competition for a limited bucket of resources. To me, that's one of the biggest changes that started to take place, and we'll see more of it coming on.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Avi. If I could just add on to that. So, as I started out saying that, the COVID crisis has caused just about every industry to rethink how it's going to do business. In healthcare, because of the need to many hospital systems make this rapid pivot to telehealth, some interesting data is emerging. So number one, patients kind of like it. There's data suggesting that people who would not normally show up for their routine appointment in a doctor's office are actually tuning in over the digital platforms. So patients kind of like it. The government has forced an acceleration and modification of laws that now are permissive of technologies like telehealth. So as Avi pointed out, there was all of these barriers because states control licensing, and there was this block in terms of a provider actually taking care of a patient across state lines. It turns out that there is pending legislation to remove those barriers, and a large advocacy group, in fact, supporting the removal of those barriers. Providers have started signing on. So the issue of providers being able to create greater capacity within their own practices by handling a portion of the problems over by telehealth or other digital platforms has now changed the mindset of providers. And I think this is all good as long as we, again, think about the comprehensive strategy and how we develop systems around it to make sure that the patient care is not compromised. The one thing that hasn't changed, and in fact is open to a great deal of vulnerability and criticism, is actually how we develop our professional workforce. We still have this basically hospital-based apprenticeship system, which is going, unless they adapt their educational model, is going to lead to a deficit in experience, I think, in competency in the doctors and nurses that are developed, because they won't have an exposure to a number of patients who now will be cared for at home. So we have to watch that particular aspect going forward.
Yeah. Pete?
Yes.
Can I go over a few slides that will address some of the questions that we saw in the Q&A?
Good, you've seen them, because we have several questions related to digital information, the healthcare record, sharing of information. I think what you brought up about blockchain is very relevant. What else? So yeah, I think that would address them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, let me just.
As a time check, we're about 20 minutes left, so it should be.
Yeah, I know, yeah. So kind of like to do that, okay. So we mentioned the fact that in our city in Boston, transformation that would have taken 10 years for startups took hospitals, once they get going, a month, and they did 1+ million visits. If you look at the impact of the pandemic, we are talking about 31 million cases in the US. We passed the 7 million, unbelievable number of deaths, job losses, and so forth. So the cost per patient who walks into the hospital is on average $40,000, varying by age. An interesting phenomena, if you look at the US data, it's a fairly recent data, what we see in there that 80% of the deaths are for individuals 65 years and old. So the question is there any future for nursing home or for adult care? Because they get a lot of infection crossed from one to another. And that brings the whole movement of aging in place to front and center. Bear in mind that most of our medical expenses are attributable to patients 60, 65 years and older. The young population is relatively, luckily, inexpensive. So what are we going to do about developing new technology, new sensor for aging in place? Will it be run by conventional hospital, or new companies will come up to do that? With telemedicine, there was some question, and I put some notes here to answer. One is, it was rapidly deployed. Some of it, bear in mind, HIPAA, which is a very rigid regulation based on military defense standards, because when it was developed in the year 2000, it's old and new at the time, cybersecure at the time, and they waived a lot of the HIPAA requirements. You know, confidentiality is important, saving life is order magnitudes far more important, okay? And cross-border licensure, as Dr. Woodson mentioned, there is a second look at it. Hopefully, we'll be relaxing dramatically on this dimension. Reimbursement have been really a sticking point, and some of you mentioned it in your comments. We're expecting far more generous reimbursement. There's a push from the hospitals. I can call my lawyer, and she's charging me $10 a minute for conversation. I call my physician, and maybe they can charge me $2 a minute. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it makes any sense to anybody. And there are a lot of companies, American Well or Amwell as they're called, based in Boston or other, who become giant in already providing telemedicine. Primarily, it started with acute care. My own research area in telemedicine for chronic care, for motion disorders, diabetic retinopathy, and chronic migraine. We compared two legs. We provided the placebo comparison, and it showed that telemedicine is equal or better in many ways. The question is, of course, will it all stay? Will telemedicine be predominant for acute care or for chronic care? And what do we miss when we don't do face-to-face tests? Can you go to dermatologist for annual check with telemedicine? I personally still doubt it, but maybe they'll develop sensors over the time. What are the contraindications for telemedicine? When do you tell a patient, you know what? For what we are talking about, you hurry to the next urgent care or emergency medicine hospital. And this is not the case for a mobile phone. So we also need to think also what are the contraindications for telemedicine. But there are also many open issues. RPM, what you call remote patient monitoring with new sensor. Who are the vendors who develop it, who test the sensor, who validates it? We started in Rochester treating COVID patients at home with remote sensors, and it was a major time savings, and clinically the data is still out, but initial indication are that it was at par with bringing patient to the hospital with all the contagion risk that it takes it. In digital technology, there's a fact that many of us are well aware of. It's high fixed cost, low variable cost. So it leads to what we call the winner takes it all. You have one Google, one Facebook, one Amazon. Will it happen in healthcare? Would one hospital dominate everything else, nationally, internationally, or at the state level? Is telemedicine a complement or a substitute to office visits? And at what level? There's another issue of continuity of care. If I don't feel well and my primary care provider does not provide me with telemedicine, I'm going to somebody else over the internet. So what happens to continuity of care when we get one person online for mental health to look at depression, another one that helps me with childcare, another one that helps me with some eczema on the skin, and so on. So it breaks the whole model of continuity of care that we carefully built around different systems. Will it be socially equitable? Clearly, those who live with the richer zip code have better access, better Wi-Fi, better cameras on the computers. But unfortunately, we leave behind a lot of patients who require and need it, and it becomes unfair to leave them behind when they cannot have equal access to healthcare, to telemedicine. What are the new business model and how home healthcare, and Dr. Woodson talked about the hospital at home, which was pioneered at Johns Hopkins Hospital. We work with the pioneers there. And how is that going to change over time? There's another issue regarding epidemiology. Epidemiology is a very well-respected science, but the problem is that the classical model they have here, the SEIR, does not really apply as much as we want for the COVID case. Because if you look at the model on the right side of my screen, there are infected patients which are symptomatic and infected patients which are and stay asymptomatic, a large percentage of them. So how do we find them? How do we identify them? And whether they become super spreader or not. So say, okay, we have contact tracing. But the contact tracing is a highly manual process that hardly scales up. Contact tracing, we know from epidemiology, works well for sexually transmitted diseases. The number of contacts is finite and pretty much people know who they've been in contact with. But when you talk in our case, I may be infected while going on a bus or sharing a taxi with somebody else or going to a pharmacy. So the contacts are far more numerous, anonymous, and it's extremely difficult to conduct it. So we've seen fairly limited success so far with contact tracing. We need to first change the SEIR model, develop new science about it, because this model also assumes segregated communities, but we travel from place to place and the numbers kind of do not add up the way they should. So we need to put a lot more mathematics and understanding of what we call the tools from operations research, statistics, etc., analytics into upgrading the SEIR model, which is almost 100 years old. There's another economic issue that we call the tragedy of the commons. There's a classic economic story of a small village where everybody had one cow. There were 100 families, each one owned one cow, and everybody lived happily ever after. Then one family decided, you know what, I want to bring another cow. And another family brought another cow, and another family brought another cow. Short run, they did well. Long run, there was not enough grass or meadow, and all the cows died from hunger. So this issue of the tragedy of the commons mean, if I don't immunize my kids, I'm causing damage not only to my kids, but potentially to everybody in the school or the daycare system or in the city. So in many ways, healthcare must lead political action. If the tragedy of the commons to be averted, we need the political system to listen far more carefully to the healthcare system. And it's up to us in healthcare system to develop the right model, the right analytic, the right digital tool to convince the political system, and if not, go above the political system to the public. We talk about federal versus state power balance. GME is one other example. The way we train physicians right now is primarily with what we call the wet labs. Very few finish graduate medical education, residency and fellowship, and understand what is deep learning, artificial intelligence. This is sad, because as medicine becomes more and more digital, we need to educate physicians almost from day one to feel far more comfortable in the digital environment. Resource allocations. We've seen a hospital who say we have digital strategy and ask, what is your budget? They say there's no budget for it. So it doesn't happen. And licensure and regulation, we talk about it, balancing access, equity, and freedom is utmost important for society to accept what we want to do. So what we see right now is different giants, like Google is getting into devices and data. Apple is getting to personal data and wearable, but they're also diving into healthcare insurance with United, Devote Healthcare, and Aetna. They say, if I can tell you with the devices who is active and who's making 200 steps a day. Amazon is already big into a prescription hospital supply chain. Facebook is working with New York University, NYU, on medical imaging research. They say, the same technology we're using to identify faces in Facebook, I want to identify tumors when I analyze medical images. So they're looking at MRI, and they got some initially very impressive results from what I've seen. In Boston, Haven, which is a joint venture between JP Morgan, Berkshire Hathaway, and Amazon, is kind of going under cloud of secrecy, but they want to look at different way to revamp healthcare. And these are companies basically playing a lot of improvements in the field. We know legal reform is coming because we don't have enough money to continue the way we're doing it. Unfortunately, there'll be big squeeze on cost because hospitals lost a fair amount of money caring for COVID. We'll see consolidation. We'll see a lot of innovation and push for healthcare for all, changing the way it's done, and the public health come in. So I want to end my talk with a little game. And I'm going to present to the audience 6 phenomena. The first one is patient-facing chatbots. And I want to get comments on the Q&A. Whether you think it's overrated or underrated, okay? And give me your argument. So I'm waiting for the audience, okay? Anybody thinks patient-facing chatbot is overrated or underrated, this specific technology? I'm looking for audience response, please. Any comments on the Q&A? I haven't seen any.
Perhaps we let them catch up and keep going with your other points.
Okay, the second point is artificial intelligence for telemedicine. So you talk to a machine and it does the triage or the initial caring. Anyone from the audience view, is it overrated or is it underrated? The third question is IoT in healthcare. Are people overselling it or is it being undersold? Overfunded or underfunded? I think we got shy audience for the morning.
Well, we have one answer in the chat box. Number 1, overrated. Number 2, underrated. So
any argumentation why?
3 oversold.
Is anybody giving us any argument why?
No, just a couple comments.
Okay. FDA. Is the FDA as an organization? We all know the FDA, of course, highly respected, but is it overrated or underrated? There's a lot of issues around it. Is it overfunded or underfunded? Another food for thought for the audience, and let me know if you get any other comments, is AI for drug discovery. There's a huge number of startups many of them within a mile or less from our campus in Boston, doing AI for drug discovery. There are big efforts also in Toronto, Canada. There are some leading companies there, and of course in Silicon Valley, trying to do AI for drug discovery. And the last one, which is more specific, is Flatiron Health. Overrated or underrated? So maybe we'll wait a few seconds and see if any comments on any one of those.
Several comments on chatbots. I think most people are saying underrated, that I think this is about the chatbot, can serve well to answer simple questions, great pre-screening method for initial consult. And another interesting one here, underrated exclamation point. As a sample, I've found that it feels more natural to text chat. So long as the information I receive is accurate, it would help me resolve my own issues and better determine what might require a, it's cut off, but I assume it's a visit or provider's time in telemedicine or in person. So a lot of comments on the chat bots.
Okay, good.
AI for drugs, I assume underrated.
Good.
We'll see on the chat bots. AI underrated. So a couple for AI, certainly underrated,
Okay.
but we need to find the right use cases for each, right? So good comment there.
Okay, these are very important inputs. Okay, yeah, we got
Yeah.
all underrated, but we need to find the right use case for each. They are not going to replace the human touch. That's for sure. Okay.
Yeah.
I have no idea what Flatiron is. Let me ask the audience. Anybody knows what Flatiron is? Give them a few seconds. Do you get anything, Pete, from the chatbot? Flatiron oncology-focused data aggregation. Good, got the right answer. It's one of the leading company that is using huge amount of data, correct, to help oncologists come into insights, because oncology care is one-on-one. It's primarily face-to-face still, and they're trying to make it far more scientific. So I will end at this point, and
Great.
maybe Pete, you want to take over.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all the audience. Yeah, really appreciate it. And Pete can give you our email for Dr. Woodson, myself, if you want one-on-one questions answered, by all means.
Yeah, we'll certainly follow up with everybody. I want to close with a couple of questions, or several questions that came through on digital strategy. For one comment was that the big folks have their digital strategies because of their scale, but what do the smaller delivery organizations do? Interesting questions, because we are actually developing follow-up webinars or sessions related to digital strategy for healthcare and around telehealth and digital health, and how to leverage everything you just heard about. Dr. Woodson, I know you've been at the forefront of that with working with the digital matrix and other capabilities. Any final comments on our plans or easy kind of takeaways for digital strategy?
Well, thank you, Peter, and thank you for the question, whoever posed it. I think what we have to do is drill down into just about everyone's situation to talk about what the digital strategy should look like. There clearly are some, I think, organizations that might not have the resources and might be consumed, but this is the issue about identifying who your strategic partner might be. And let me just give you one example that I usually throw out to audiences, is that if I go around and give a talk to major hospital systems, and I talk about the CVS Aetna sort of collaboration, and I note that CVS, or a Walgreens type clinic is within 10 minutes of everybody in America, and talk about the fact that they in fact are trying to capture management of some primary care problems, but also chronic disease. If I'm the hospital system, do I look at them as my competitor, or do I look at them as a potential strategic partner in delivering services? and then how should I link with them in terms of my digital investments. So I'm not saying, I'm not posing that one answer is right or wrong. It's just that I'm saying is that as we go forward, each CEO is going to have to think about what the digital strategy is, and that might bring them to a new place in terms of thinking about where they make investments and who their strategic partners are going forward. But more about this later in other webinars.
Thank you all. I guess we'll end it there. And again, thank you so much for your participation and have a great day.